They looked at her like she was furniture. To the Blackwood family, Clara was nothing more than the girl who changed the bedpans and fetched the coffee, a ghost in the corner of their father's empire. When the billionaire tycoon Harrison Blackwood died, his vultures of children descended, already counting their millions, fighting over yachts and estates before the body was even cold. They didn't even offer Clara a chair at the will reading. But they should have. Because when the lawyer broke the seal on the final testament, the room went dead silent. They thought Clara was there to serve them one last time. They were wrong. She wasn't there to serve. She was there to own. This is the story of the reading that shocked the world. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It hammered against the earth, turning the meticulously manicured grounds of the Blackwood estate into a gray, weeping landscape. It was fitting weather for the funeral of Harrison Blackwood, a man whose heart had been as cold and unyielding as the steel mills that built his fortune. Hundreds of black umbrellas crowded the cemetery, a sea of nylon shielding the heads of business rivals, politicians, and distant relatives who hadn't visited in decades. But front and center, standing under a custom-made canopy that cost more than most people's cars, stood the immediate family. There was Preston Blackwood, the eldest son. At 45, he wore his entitlement like a second skin. He checked his Rolex, a Submariner, every 30 seconds, visibly annoyed that his father's burial was taking time away from his schedule. He was already CEO of Blackwood Industries in title, but everyone knew Harrison had never fully handed over the reins. Preston was banking on today, changing that. Next to him stood Beatrice Blackwood Davis. She was dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing grief for the cameras stationed at the cemetery gates. Her husband, a hedge fund manager named Greg, looked bored, scrolling through emails on his phone, shielded by his wife's massive hat. Beatrice had already called her interior designer that morning to discuss remodeling the master wing of the estate. She hated the Victorian woodwork. She wanted modern cold marble. And then there was Tiffany Harrison's third wife. She was 32 younger than both Preston and Beatrice. She wore a black dress that was slightly too tight and heels that were slightly too high for soft grass. She was crying the loudest, a wailing sound that made the priest pause twice. Preston rolled his eyes openly at her. They all knew the prenuptial agreement was ironclad, but Tiffany was the type to fight for scraps. Standing far behind them outside the protection of the canopy stood Clara. Clara Vance, 26 years old. She wore a simple gray wool coat that had seen better days, and her shoes were soaked through by the wet grass. She didn't have an umbrella. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her hair plastered to her forehead by the rain. No one spoke to her. No one offered her shelter. To the Blackwoods, Clara was simply the help. She was the daughter of the estate's former housekeeper, a girl who had grown up in the servants' quarters. When her mother passed away 5 years ago, Clara had stayed on. And when Harrison Blackwood's health began to fail, when the cancer ate away at his strength and his mind began to drift, it wasn't Preston, Beatrice, or Tiffany who sat by his bedside. It was Clara. She was the one who wiped his brow when the fevers spiked. She was the one who read him the stock reports when his eyes grew too weak to see the numbers. She was the one who held his hand at 3 a.m. when the morphine wasn't enough to drown out the fear of death. Pathetic, Preston muttered to Beatrice, catching sight of Clara out of the corner of his eye. She's still hovering. Does she think she's going to get a severance package or something? Daddy probably promised her a few $1,000s, Beatrice whispered back, adjusting her diamond brooch. Just enough to get her out of the house. I want her gone by Monday. I need that servant's annex for my Pilates studio. Don't worry, Preston sneered. Once Sterling reads the will, I'm firing the entire domestic staff. We're selling the estate. I'm not keeping this mausoleum." The priest finished his final prayer. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. As the coffin was lowered, Clara didn't throw a rose. She simply bowed her head. She wasn't crying. She had done her crying weeks ago, mourning the man she had come to know, not the tycoon, but the frightened, lonely old man who had regretted how he raised his children. "All right, show's over," Preston announced, turning away from the open grave before the dirt was even shoveled. "Let's get to the house. Sterling said the reading is at 400 p.m. sharp." The family moved toward the fleet of waiting limousines, their shoes crunching on the gravel. Clara waited until they were all gone. She walked to the edge of the grave, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a small, smooth river stone. She placed it gently on the casket. "Rest now, Harrison," she whispered. "I'll do what you asked." She turned and began the long walk back to the main house. She didn't take a limo. She walked the 2 miles in the rain. The library of Blackwood Manor was a testament to intimidation. The walls were lined with first-edition books that had never been read, and the air smelled of lemon polish and old money. A fire roared in the massive stone hearth, but it did little to warm the tension in the room. James Sterling Harrison's attorney for over 40 years sat at the head of the massive oak desk. Sterling was a man of few words and zero patience for theatrics. He was 70, with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every sin a rich man could commit. He arranged a stack of documents in front of him. Preston sat to his right, leaning back in a leather armchair, sipping a scotch he had poured himself without asking. Beatrice sat opposite him, tapping her manicured nails on the wood. Tiffany was curled up on the sofa, looking like a nervous cat. "Can we get on with this, Sterling?" Preston barked. "I have a board meeting in Tokyo on Zoom in 3 hours. I need to know the share distribution." "Patience, Preston," Sterling said, his voice like grinding gravel. "We are waiting for one more beneficiary." Preston scoffed. "Who? One of his mistresses? Or did he leave something to the gardener?" The heavy oak doors creaked open. Clara stepped inside. She had changed out of her wet clothes into a modest black dress and a cardigan. She looked small in the doorway. "What is she doing here?" Beatrice snapped, standing up. "This is a private legal proceeding, Clara. Bring us a pot of coffee and get out." Clara didn't flinch. She was used to the tone. She opened her mouth to speak, but Mr. Sterling cut in. "Miss Vance is here at my request," Sterling said, his eyes locking onto Beatrice. "She is required to be present for the reading of the last will and testament of Harrison Blackwood." Preston laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Oh, this is rich. What did the old man leave her the tea set?" "Fine. Clara, sit in the corner, and try not to breathe too loudly." Clara walked past the empty chairs at the main table and took a seat on a small wooden stool near the window, far away from the real family. She folded her hands in her lap. Sterling waited for silence. He opened the leather folder. "I, Harrison Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament," Sterling began. The room went deadly quiet. "To my wife, Tiffany." Tiffany sat up straighter, her eyes widening. "I leave the sum of $5 million contingent upon her vacating the Blackwood estate within 48 hours. Furthermore, she retains the jewelry gifted to her prior to 2024. Any jewelry purchased after that date remains the property of the estate." Tiffany gasped. $5 million? That's it. The prenup said 10. The prenup had a fidelity clause, Mrs. Blackwood, Sterling said, not looking up from the paper. Harrison knew about the personal trainer in Miami. Be grateful he left you the 5. Tiffany's face went pale. She slumped back into the sofa, silenced. Preston smirked. "Serves you right. Keep going, Sterling. Let's get to the company." "To my daughter Beatrice." Beatrice smoothed her dress, looking smug. "I leave my collection of Impressionist paintings valued at approximately $15 million. However, the estate in the Hamptons is to be sold with proceeds going to the Blackwood Charitable Trust. Beatrice, you never visited the Hamptons house to see me, only to throw parties. You may keep the art, as you always preferred looking at pictures of life rather than living it." Beatrice turned red. That spiteful old man, I want to contest this." "You can try," Sterling said calmly. "But the will includes a no contest clause. If you challenge any part of it, you forfeit everything. Do you want the paintings, or do you want nothing?" Beatrice shut her mouth, seething. "Now," Preston said, setting his glass down. "The real assets. The industries. The portfolio. Read it." Sterling turned the page. He took a long pause, looking over his reading glasses at Preston. "To my son, Preston." Finally, Preston muttered. "I leave my vintage car collection, including the 1962 Ferrari GTO. I also leave you the seat on the board of directors, provided you can maintain a majority vote." Preston frowned. "The cars, the seat. What about the controlling shares? What about the ownership of Blackwood Industries?" Sterling didn't answer him immediately. He turned another page. The atmosphere in the library shifted from impatient greed to confusion. The heavy rain lashed against the window pane next to where Clara sat unnoticed and silent. "Sterling, I asked you a question." Preston stood up, slamming his hand on the desk. "Who gets the controlling interest? If he didn't leave it to me, who did he leave it to Beatrice? She can't even balance a checkbook." "Sit down, Preston," Sterling commanded. The authority in his voice was unexpected. Even Preston, a man used to being obeyed, hesitated and sank back into his chair. Sterling continued reading, his voice devoid of emotion. "I have left specific cash sums to my various staff members. To my driver Michael, $50,000. To the head chef Marco, $50,000. To the groundskeeping team, $20,000 each." Beatrice let out a shrill, disbelief-filled laugh. "He's giving away the liquid cash to the servants. This is dementia. This is proof of incompetence." "He was perfectly sane, Beatrice," Clara said softly from her corner. All three heads snapped toward her. "You don't get to speak," Beatrice hissed. "You're lucky he didn't forget you. Maybe you'll get enough to buy a used Honda." Sterling cleared his throat loudly. "As I was saying, the remainder of the personal assets, furniture, the horses, the private jet, are to be liquidated and donated to the St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital." "The jet," Preston choked out. "He sold the Gulfstream." "He didn't sell it, Preston. He gave it away," Sterling corrected. "Harrison felt that since none of you flew home to see him for Christmas in the last 4 years, you had no need for private aviation." The room was heavy with the realization that this was not a will. It was a judgment. Harrison Blackwood was settling scores from the grave. He was stripping them of the toys they loved more than him. "But the company," Preston whispered, his face turning a shade of purple. "The company is worth $4 billion. He can't liquidate that. It would crash the market. Who gets the company?" Sterling closed the folder he was reading from. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a separate envelope. It was thick, sealed with red wax, and looked significantly older than the previous documents. "Harrison knew this moment would come," Sterling said, his eyes moving from Preston to Beatrice and finally resting on Clara in the shadows. "He created a separate trust, the Phoenix Trust. It holds the 51% controlling stake in Blackwood Industries, the deed to this manor, and the entirety of his private investment portfolio. Okay, Preston exhaled, loosening his tie. Okay, a trust. That's standard tax avoidance. Who are the trustees? Me and Beatrice, just me. Sterling broke the wax seal. The crack sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. The Phoenix Trust has a sole beneficiary, Sterling stated. Harrison had a specific criteria for his heir. The lawyer continued, looking at the paper. He wrote a letter to accompany this designation. Shall I read it first? Just read the damn name? Tiffany shrieked, desperate to see if there was a loophole for her. Read the letter, Clara said. Her voice was stronger this time. She stood up. Preston spun around. Sit down, you little rat, Sterling, ignore her. Actually, Sterling said, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time. I think reading the letter is essential. He unfolded the handwritten note. To my children, Sterling read Harrison's voice, seemingly echoing in the room. I gave you the best education money could buy. I gave you cars, houses, and opportunities. But I failed to give you the one thing that matters, a heart. I spent the last 2 years of my life dying. I watched the door every day, hoping one of you would walk in, not to ask for a loan, not to ask for a connection, but just to ask how I was. You never came. Beatrice looked down at her lap. Preston stared at the wall, his jaw clenched. You treated the people around you like tools. You treated your family like a bank. And you treated the one person who actually cared for me like she was invisible. You thought she was the help. You thought she was beneath you. Sterling paused. He looked directly at Preston. But in those long nights when the pain was bad, she was the daughter I wished I had raised. She listened. She learned. She managed my affairs when I was too weak to hold a pen. You all assumed Preston was running the company for the last 6 months. You were wrong. Every major decision, every merger, every stock buyback. I didn't sign off on those. She did, under my direction. Preston's face went white. That's a lie. That's illegal. It's perfectly legal under power of attorney, Sterling countered. And she did a better job than you would have. Returns are up 12%. Sterling looked back at the document. Therefore, I leave the Phoenix Trust, including the controlling interest in Blackwood Industries, the Blackwood Manor, and all remaining assets, to the only person who earned it. Sterling took a deep breath. I leave it all to my adopted daughter, Clara Vance. The silence that followed Sterling's declaration was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a bomb detonation. For 10 seconds, the only sound in the library was the crackling of the logs in the fireplace and the rhythmic drumming of rain against the glass. Then Preston Blackwood exploded. You lying old vulture! Preston roared, lunging across the gap between his chair and the desk. He grabbed the heavy oak edge of Sterling's desk, his knuckles turning white. This is a joke. This is a sick, twisted joke. Read it again. Read the real will. I have read the valid legal document, Preston, Sterling said, not even flinching. He placed a heavy hand over the papers, protecting them. She's the maid, Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysteria that shattered her composed socialite facade. She pointed a trembling finger at Clara. She's the help. She changed his diapers. She washed the floors. You think Daddy left a $4 billion empire to the girl who scrubs the toilets? He was senile. He was out of his mind. He was perfectly lucid, Sterling cut in, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, harder. In fact, anticipating exactly this reaction from his greedy offspring, Harrison took the liberty of recording a video statement on the day he signed the adoption papers and the new will. Would you like to see it? Adoption? Tiffany whispered, her eyes darting back and forth. Wait, if she's adopted, it means she is legally your sister, Tiffany, Sterling said with a dry smile. Or rather, she is legally Harrison's daughter. And since the adoption was finalized 6 months ago, she has full legal standing as his next of kin. Preston kicked his chair over. It clattered loudly against the floorboards. I'll sue. I will bury you in litigation for the next 20 years, Sterling. I'll freeze every asset. I'll make sure this little gold digger never sees a dime. Undue influence. That's what this is. She drugged him. She manipulated an old, dying man into signing away his legacy. He turned his rage toward Clara. He took 2 aggressive steps toward her. How did you do it, huh? Did you sleep with him? Did you threaten him, you little gutter rat? Clara didn't flinch. She didn't back away. For the first time in her life, she didn't lower her eyes in the presence of a Blackwood. She stood up slowly. The movement was graceful, deliberate. She looked Preston directly in the eye, and the transformation was startling. The meek servant girl was gone. In her place was a woman who held the power of a god in her hands. I didn't sleep with him, Preston, Clara said. Her voice was calm, contrasting sharply with his screaming. And I didn't threaten him. I listened to him. Something you haven't done since you were 12 years old. Shut up! You don't speak to me! Preston shouted, spit flying from his lips. I do speak to you, Clara replied, her voice hardening. In fact, as the owner of this house, I'm the only one who decides who speaks here, and right now I'm deciding that you are finished. Beatrice gasped. You can't throw us out. This is our childhood home. A home you haven't visited in 3 years, Beatrice, Clara countered, turning her gaze to the sister. You called Harrison on his birthday last year. Do you remember what you said? You didn't say happy birthday. You asked if you could borrow the chalets in Aspen for your friends. He cried that night. I sat with him until dawn because he was heartbroken that his only daughter saw him as a travel agency. Beatrice opened her mouth, but no words came out. The truth struck her like a physical blow. And you, Preston? Clara continued, stepping out from the shadows of the corner. She walked toward the center of the room. You talk about the company like it's yours, but you don't know the first thing about it. You think the merger with the Tokyo Group stalled because of regulatory issues, Noam. It stalled because the CEO of the Tokyo Group met you once, found you arrogant and uninformed, and refused to sign. Harrison had to personally intervene. I typed the apology letter. Preston froze. You saw those emails. I wrote those emails, Clara corrected. Harrison dictated them. I cleaned up the grammar. I smoothed over the insults you caused. I have been the acting CEO in everything but name for 8 months, Preston. While you were golfing in Dubai, I was reviewing the Q3 projections. Sterling watched the scene with a look of grim satisfaction. He tapped the folder. The will is ironclad, Preston. We have 3 independent doctors who certified Harrison's mental state on the day of signing. We have the video testimony. We have the adoption decree signed by Judge Halloway. If you sue, you will lose, and the legal fees will come out of your own pocket, which, considering your gambling debts in Vegas, I assume isn't very deep right now. Preston went pale. The mention of the gambling debts was a low blow, but effective. He looked around the room, realizing the walls were closing in. This isn't over, Preston hissed, grabbing his coat. The board of directors won't stand for this. They won't let a housekeeper run a Fortune 500 company. They'll vote you out before you can even sit in the chair. I'm calling an emergency meeting for Monday morning. We'll see who owns the company then. He stormed out of the library, slamming the heavy doors so hard the windows rattled. Beatrice stood up, looking lost. She looked at Clara, her eyes swimming with fake tears. Clara, sweetie, you know I didn't mean what I said earlier. I was just emotional. We're sisters now. We should— Stop, Clara said, cutting her off. Just stop, Beatrice. You have your paintings. You have your 15 million. I suggest you go pack your things. Sterling said you have 48 hours, but I'd prefer you be gone by tomorrow noon. I'm having the locks changed. Beatrice's face crumpled from fake sympathy to pure hatred in a split second. She grabbed her purse and marched out without another word. Tiffany remained on the sofa looking terrified. "Clara, I never treated you badly, did I? I mean, I ignored you, but I wasn't mean like them." Clara looked at the young widow. "You ignored him too, Tiffany. Take your $5 million and go. The car is waiting." When the room finally emptied, leaving only Clara and Sterling, the old lawyer let out a long breath. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "That went better than I expected," Sterling muttered. "I thought Preston might actually throw a punch." Clara walked over to the desk and touched the leather folder that held her new life. Her hand was trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "He's going to destroy the company, Mr. Sterling," Clara said quietly. "He said he's calling a board meeting. He's going to try to burn it down before I can take control." And Sterling looked up at her. "He can try. But you hold 51% of the voting stock now. He can't vote you out." "He can manipulate the board," Clara said, her mind racing. "He can destroy files. He can transfer assets. He has access to the servers until Monday morning. He thinks I'm just a maid who got lucky. He doesn't know I have the administrative codes." Clara looked out the window at the storm. Her eyes hardened. "I'm not waiting until Monday," she said. "Sterling, give me the keys to the office." "The downtown tower." Sterling raised an eyebrow. "It's Saturday evening. Security will be tight." "I own the tower," Clara said, "and I have work to do." The Blackwood Industries headquarters was a 60-story monolith of glass and steel that pierced the Seattle skyline. It was a fortress of commerce, a place where thousands of people worked and billions of dollars moved through fiber-optic cables every second. It was 9:00 p.m. on Saturday night when Preston Blackwood's McLaren screeched into the executive parking garage. He swiped his badge at the elevator, his hands shaking with rage. He needed to get to the 60th floor. He needed to access the mainframe. There were files, records of diverted funds, kickbacks from contractors, and creative accounting that he had hidden deep in the system. If Clara took control, if she brought in auditors, he wouldn't just be poor. He would be in federal prison. "Think, Preston, think," he muttered to himself as the elevator ascended. "Delete the Cayman accounts. Shred the contracts with Omega Corp. Frame it as a server error." He burst onto the executive floor. The lights were dimmed, the cubicles empty. He ran down the hallway to the CEO's office, his father's office, which he had been using as his own for the last 6 months. He slammed his hand on the biometric scanner. Access granted. He rushed inside, threw his coat on the floor, and sat at the massive glass desk. He woke the computer up. His reflection stared back at him from the dark screen, wild-eyed, sweating, desperate. He began typing furiously. "System admin. Password PB King1980. Access denied." Preston frowned. He retyped it. "Access denied." "What?" he growled. "Caps lock." He checked. "No." He typed it again slowly. "Access denied. Your account has been suspended. Contact administrator." "Suspended?" Preston screamed. "I am the administrator." He grabbed the desk phone and dialed IT support. It rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. "IT, this is Kevin." "Kevin, this is Preston Blackwood. My login isn't working. Reset it. Now." "Oh, Mr. Blackwood." Kevin sounded nervous. I can't do that, sir." "What do you mean you can't? Do you know who I am? I'll fire you." "I know who you are, sir, but we got a priority 1 lockout order about 20 minutes ago. It came from the root user, the master key. All executive accounts are frozen pending a security audit." The root user. Preston felt cold ice in his stomach. Only one person had the root user codes. His father. That's impossible. My father is dead. I know, sir, but the code was valid. It was authorized by, let me check the log, a Ms. Clara Vance. Preston dropped the phone. The elevator chimed down the hall. Preston spun around. He heard footsteps. Sharp, confident clicks of heels against the marble floor. They weren't the heavy, shuffling steps of a security guard. They were the steps of someone who owned the ground they walked on. The double doors to the office swung open. Clara stood there. But she wasn't wearing the cardigan and wool coat from the funeral. She had stopped at the estate on her way into the city. She was wearing one of the tailored suits Harrison had bought for her. Future role, a sharp navy blue blazer with a silk blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional bun. She looked like a CEO. Behind her stood two large men in dark suits, private security. And behind them, James Sterling. "Get out of my chair, Preston," Clara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that seemed to lower the temperature in the room. Preston stood up, trembling. You locked me out. You can't do that. I'm the acting CEO until the board meets. You were the acting CEO, Clara corrected, walking further into the room. But as of 8:30 p.m., when Mr. Sterling filed the emergency motion with the corporate registrar, I am the interim chairwoman. And my first act was to secure the digital assets of this company to prevent looting. She glanced at the computer screen, which still flashed the access denied message. "Trying to hide the Omega files, Preston?" she asked casually. Preston's knees almost gave out. How do you know about Omega?" Clara walked around the desk. She didn't sit down yet. She stood next to him, looking at the screen. "I told you, I read everything Harrison read. I know about the kickbacks. I know about the shell company in the Cayman Islands. I know you've been siphoning about $200,000 a month for your consulting fees." Preston backed away, bumping into the bookshelf. "That's a lie. That's aggressive accounting." "It's embezzlement," Sterling interjected from the doorway. "And it's a felony." "I can have you arrested right now," Clara said, turning to face him. "I have the evidence. It's already downloaded to a secure drive. The police are just a phone call away." Preston looked at the security guards, then at Sterling, and finally at Clara. He realized with a terrifying clarity that he had underestimated her. He had looked at her for 10 years and seen a uniform. He hadn't seen the intellect sharpening behind her eyes. He fell to his knees. It was pathetic. The arrogance vanished, replaced by the desperate pleading of a coward. "Clara, please," he choked out. "Don't call the police. I'll leave. I'll resign. Just don't send me to jail. I'm your brother, your adopted brother." Clara looked down at him with an expression of pity but not mercy. "You weren't my brother when I was scrubbing your mud off the foyer floor, Preston. You weren't my brother when you made fun of my mother's funeral. You weren't my brother when you left Harrison to die alone." She walked around the desk and finally sat in the massive leather chair. It squeaked as she settled in. It fit her perfectly. "I won't call the police," Clara said. Preston exhaled, sobbing with relief. "Thank you. Thank you, Clara." "On one condition," she added. Preston looked up, hope in his eyes. "Anything." "You will sign a full admission of guilt regarding the embezzlement. You will repay every cent you stole by liquidating your personal assets. The Ferrari, the condo, everything. And you will resign from the board immediately." "If I liquidate everything, I'll be broke," Preston whispered. "Then you better start looking for a job," Clara said, pulling a document from her briefcase and sliding it across the glass desk toward him. "I hear the mailroom is hiring, but you might need a reference." She tossed a pen onto the paper. "Sign it Preston, or the next people walking through that door will be the FBI." With a shaking hand, Preston Blackwood signed away his life. He stood up, a broken man, and walked out of the office, passing the security guards, who didn't even look at him. Clara watched him go. As the elevator doors closed, the room fell silent. Sterling walked over. "You handled that with remarkable precision, Clara. Harrison would have been proud, but Preston is the easy part." "I know," Clara said, looking out the window at the city lights below. The rain was stopping, leaving the city glittering like diamonds. "The board meeting is on Monday. They aren't criminals like Preston. They are sharks. They won't care about justice. They'll only care about stock prices, and they're going to eat me alive if I show any weakness." "Mr. O'Connell is the lead director," Sterling warned. "He's old school. He doesn't believe women should run heavy industry. He's going to challenge your competence." Clara turned back to the computer. She typed in the root password, a sequence of numbers that was her mother's birthday. The system unlocked. "Welcome, Administrator." "Let him challenge me," Clara said, her eyes reflecting the blue light of the screen. "I have 36 hours to memorize the last 10 years of board minutes. Get some coffee, Mr. Sterling. It's going to be a long night." Monday morning arrived with a sky of the color of bruised iron. The boardroom on the 60th floor of Blackwood Industries was designed to make people feel small. The table was a single slab of black marble 30 feet long. The chairs were high-backed leather thrones. And sitting around that table were 12 of the most powerful men in the Pacific Northwest, the Board of Directors. At the head of the table, the chairman's seat remained empty. Marcus O'Connell sat to the immediate right of the empty chair. O'Connell was a man cut from the same cloth as Harrison Blackwood, but without the late billionaire's hidden heart. He was 75, ruthless, and had made it clear in the hallway that he intended to crush the maid before she could even pour a glass of water. "Gentlemen," O'Connell rumbled, checking his watch, "it is 9:00 a.m. The girl isn't here. As I predicted, she's overwhelmed. I move that we immediately invoke Article 12 of the bylaws, incapacity of leadership, and appoint myself as interim CEO to stabilize the stock price." "Seconded," said a man named Mr. Henderson, a nervous vice president who always followed O'Connell's lead. "All in favor?" O'Connell asked, raising his hand. "Opposed," said a clear, steady voice from the doorway. The heavy double doors swung open. Clara Vance walked in. She didn't look like she had been awake for 36 hours straight. She looked immaculate. She wore a charcoal gray suit that was sharp enough to cut glass, and she carried a single slim tablet. James Sterling walked a step behind her, carrying a stack of files. Clara walked straight to the head of the table. She didn't ask permission. She pulled out the chairman's chair, the chair Harrison had sat in for 40 years, and sat down. She placed the tablet on the marble. The silence in the room was thick with hostility. "You're late," O'Connell sneered. "We were just voting to remove you." "I was delayed," Clara said calmly, tapping the screen of her tablet. "I was on a call with the foreman of the Shanghai Distribution Center. Apparently there was a bottleneck in the cobalt supply chain that had been ignored for 3 weeks. I fixed it." O'Connell laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "You fixed a supply chain issue. What did you do?" "Miss Vance dust the shelves." The other board members chuckled nervously. Clara didn't smile. She looked up, her eyes locking onto O'Connell. "No, Marcus. I authorized a switch to the secondary supplier in Vietnam to bypass the tariff hike that kicked in at midnight, a tariff hike you seemingly forgot about in last month's risk assessment. If I hadn't made that call at 6:00 a.m., this company would have lost $4 million by lunch." The smile vanished from O'Connell's face. He glanced at the papers in front of him. He hadn't known about the tariff hike. "Beginner's luck," O'Connell grunted. "Listen to me, young lady. We all know what happened. You manipulated a sick old man. But running a multinational conglomerate isn't about changing bedpans. It's about strategy. It's about vision. The shareholders are panicking. The stock is down 4% since the news broke. They want a leader, not a charity case." "I agree," Clara said. "They do want a leader." She stood up and walked slowly around the table. The directors watched her, unsettled by her confidence. "You think I'm here because I was the housekeeper?" Clara said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "You think I don't know this company? But tell me, Mr. Henderson." She stopped behind the nervous man's chair. "Who wrote the Project Horizon initiative last year, the one that shifted our focus to renewable energy grids?" Henderson stammered. "Well, Harrison did. It was his memo." "It was his signature," Clara corrected. "But look at page 4 of the original proposal. The citation on the hydroelectric efficiency data." She waited. Henderson said nothing. "It references a study from the University of Zurich," Clara said. "A study that wasn't translated into English until 2 months after the proposal was signed. Harrison didn't read German. I do." A murmur went through the room. Clara continued circling the table. "And the acquisition of the drone startup in Austin, you all advised against it. You said it was too risky. Harrison pushed it through. Why? Because I read the patent filings and realized their battery technology was 2 years ahead of the market. That risky acquisition is now generating 15% of our quarterly revenue." She returned to the head of the table and leaned forward, placing her hands on the marble. "I didn't just take care of Harrison Blackwood's body," she said fiercely. "I was his eyes, I was his ears, and for the last 2 years I have been his mind. You haven't been following Harrison's orders, gentlemen. You've been following mine." O'Connell stood up, his face red. "This is preposterous. You're claiming you ran this company. You're a 26-year-old nobody." "I am the majority shareholder," Clara snapped. "And I am the chairwoman. And right now, Marcus, I'm looking at your file." She signaled to Sterling. The lawyer slid a thin blue folder across the table to O'Connell. O'Connell looked at it, then at Clara. "What is this?" "That is an audit of your expense accounts from the last 5 years," Clara said quietly. "It seems you've been charging the company for client dinners that suspiciously coincide with your family vacations to Tuscany. And the construction contracts for the new warehouse, they went to your brother-in-law's firm, despite being 20% over budget." The room went deathly silent. This was the kill shot. "I could release this to the SEC," Clara said. "I could have you removed for cause and stripped of your pension. Or—" O'Connell swallowed hard. He looked at the folder, then at the determined young woman who had outmaneuvered him. Or you can sit down," Clara said. "You can vote to confirm my appointment as permanent CEO, and you can help me guide this company into the next quarter. If you do that, the audit stays in the safe." O'Connell stood there for a long moment. He looked at the other board members. He saw no support. They were terrified that she had files on them too. Slowly, painfully, Marcus O'Connell sat down. "I move to confirm Clara Vance as CEO," O'Connell said, his voice hollow. "Seconded," Henderson said immediately. "All in favor?" Clara asked. 12 hands went up. "Motion carried," Clara said. She sat back in the leather chair. "Now turn to page 1 of the agenda. We need to discuss the expansion into the European market. And gentlemen, keep up." The victory in the boardroom was decisive, but Clara quickly learned that the corporate world was only one battlefield. The war for the Blackwood legacy was about to spill into the streets. For 3 days, there was a deceptive calm. Then the storm broke. It didn't start with a lawsuit. It started with a morning talk show. Beatrice Blackwood sat on the plush beige sofa of the Morning View, clutching a tissue, looking frail and devastated. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "He was vulnerable," Beatrice sobbed to the host, her voice trembling perfectly for the cameras. My father was confused in those final months. He didn't know who was who. And that woman, she isolated him. She changed the locks. She wouldn't let his own children say goodbye. We believe she coerced him. We believe she forced a dying man to sign away his family's future. The narrative was intoxicatingly scandalous. The innocent grieving children versus the manipulative gold-digging servant, the Black Widow of Blackwood Manor. By noon, the internet was on fire. The hashtag Justice for the Blackwoods was trending globally. By 2:00 p.m., the stock price of Blackwood Industries had plummeted 12%. By 4:00 p.m., the protesters arrived. Clara stood in her office on the 60th floor, looking down at the ants gathering on the pavement below. They held signs that read, "Thief, Elder Abuse, and Return the Money." The glass walls of her office, usually a symbol of transparency, now felt like the walls of a fishbowl. "The banks are calling Clara," Sterling said, his voice grim, as he hung up the phone. "First National is threatening to freeze the credit lines. They're saying the instability of leadership triggers a default clause. If the stock drops another 10 points, the board will have no choice but to remove you to save the company. O'Connell is already texting the other directors." Clara turned from the window. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. "They don't want the company," she said softly. "They want to destroy me. If they can't have the toy, they'll break it." "We need to settle," Sterling advised, looking older than his 70 years. "Give them a payout, 20 million each. Make them sign a retraction. It's the only way to stop the bleeding." "No," Clara said. The word was quiet, but absolute. "If I pay them, I admit guilt. If I pay them, I validate every lie they've told. Harrison didn't leave me this chair to negotiate with terrorists." "Then what do we do?" "We are losing the narrative, Clara. The truth doesn't matter if no one hears it." Clara walked to the safe in the corner of the office. She spun the dial, left, right, left. The heavy door clicked open. She reached inside and pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive. It was the one item Harrison had entrusted to her explicitly for the rainy day. She held it up. "We don't need a settlement, James. We need a screening." The atrium of Blackwood Tower was transformed into a coliseum. Hundreds of reporters from CNN, Fox Business, and the BBC were crammed into the space, their cameras trained on the podium. The air was thick with hostility. The world wanted to see the maid crumble. Preston and Beatrice were there, standing off to the side, flanked by a team of high-priced lawyers. Preston looked smug. Beatrice looked mournfully triumphant. They had won. They knew Clara was there to announce her resignation. Clara walked onto the stage. She was alone. No PR team, no script. She wore white, a stark contrast to the black suits of her accusers. The flashbulbs were blinding, a strobe light of judgment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clara began, her voice amplified through the massive speakers. "For the past week, I have been accused of stealing a legacy. I have been accused of keeping a father from his children." "Because you did," a heckler shouted from the back. Clara didn't flinch. She looked directly at Beatrice. "The narrative you have been sold is a tragedy," Clara said. "But the villain is not who you think it is. I am not going to ask you to believe me. I am going to ask you to listen to the only person whose opinion matters." She signaled to the tech booth. "Play it." The massive LED screen behind her, usually used for stock tickers, flickered to life. The room went silent. The video was high definition. It was dated October 14th of the previous year, Harrison's birthday. Harrison Blackwood sat in his armchair, hooked up to an IV drip, looking frail. But his eyes were sharp, staring directly into the lens. "This is Harrison Blackwood," the video voice rasped. "I am recording this because I know my children. I know that when I am gone they will not mourn me. They will mourn the loss of my wallet." In the atrium, Preston's smile faltered. Beatrice stiffened. The video cut to a montage of clips Harrison had secretly recorded. Clip 1. December 24th. Harrison was holding a phone on speaker. "Dad, look, I can't come to Seattle." Preston's voice rang out clearly from the recording. "Aspen is booked solid and I have a networking event. Just wire the bonus to my Cayman account. Okay, I'll visit in the spring." Harrison looked at the camera, tears in his eyes. "He didn't ask how the chemo went," the old man whispered. Clip 2, January 10th. A hidden camera angle from the hospital room. Beatrice was standing by the bed. Harrison was feigning sleep. "God, how long is this going to take?" Beatrice was saying to someone on her cell phone. "He's lingering. The doctor said 2 weeks, it's been 2 months. I need that inheritance to cover the liquidity issue with the Hamptons house. It's so selfish of him to just hang on like this." A collective gasp swept through the atrium. The reporters turned their cameras away from the stage and toward the siblings. Beatrice's face had drained of all color. She looked like she was going to be sick. Clip 3. The Final Testament. Harrison looked directly at the camera. "Clara didn't steal me away," he said, his voice gaining strength. "She was the only one who stayed. She cleaned me. She read to me. She ran my company from my bedside, while my son gambled in Vegas, and my daughter redecorated her mansion. I am leaving everything to Clara Vance, not because she served me, but because she saved me. If you are watching this, it means my children have tried to destroy her. Don't let them. They are the thieves. She is the heir." The screen went black. The silence in the atrium was absolute. It was the silence of a truth so heavy it crushed the air out of the room. Then the chaos erupted. But this time the questions weren't hurled at Clara. "Mrs. Davis, did you really call your father's survival selfish? Preston, is it true you missed Christmas for a networking event? Is the liquidity issue related to the embezzlement charges?" The mob turned. The flashbulbs swung toward the corner where the siblings stood. Preston tried to block a camera with his hand. Beatrice was sobbing, but this time the tears were real tears of humiliation. They were swarmed, pushed back against the marble wall, stripped of their victimhood in seconds. Clara watched them for a moment, feeling no joy, only a profound sense of closure. She stepped away from the podium, leaving them to the wolves they had summoned. 1 year later. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of the cemetery, turning the world soft and gray. Clara walked along the stone path, her heels clicking rhythmically. She wasn't alone. A security detail waited discreetly by the gates, a necessary precaution for one of the most powerful women in America. She reached the black marble headstone. Harrison Blackwood, beloved father, titan of industry. She placed a single white rose on the granite. "We finished the solar initiative, Harrison," she said softly to the stone. "The stock is up 40%, and I finally fired O'Connell. He's retiring to Florida." She adjusted her coat against the chill. Much had changed in 12 months. The fallout from the press conference had been nuclear. The public shame was so intense that the Blackwood siblings had been forced into exile. Preston, facing criminal charges for the embezzlement revealed in the audit, had pleaded no contest to avoid prison time. He was currently managing a mid-range car rental lot in Ohio, far away from the high-stakes tables of Vegas. Beatrice had been sued by the Charitable Trust for defamation. She lost everything. The Hamptons estate, the art, the jewelry, all liquidated. Rumor had it she was running an online etiquette course, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Jersey. They hadn't just lost the money, they had lost the name. To be a Blackwood now meant nothing if you didn't have the character to back it up. "You were right," Clara whispered. They didn't break me. She heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. It was Sterling. He had officially retired 6 months ago, but he still met her here on the anniversary. "The board is waiting, Madam CEO," Sterling said, a genuine smile crinkling his eyes. "The merger with the European tech firm closes at noon. They won't sign without you." Clara looked at the grave one last time. She touched the cold stone, a silent promise kept. "Let's go," she said, turning back toward the waiting fleet of cars. "We have work to do." She walked away from the grave, not as the maid who served the family, but as the matriarch who redefined it. The rain began to fall, washing away the past, leaving only the future. Clara's journey from the shadows of the servants' quarters to the head of the boardroom proves one undeniable truth. True power isn't inherited. It is earned through character, resilience, and loyalty. While the world ignored her, she was preparing. While the family chased status, she was building substance. In the end, the will didn't just give her money. It revealed who was truly worthy of the legacy too. Eat before you go. If you enjoyed this story of justice served and the underdog rising to the top, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you want more stories about karma, betrayal, and dramatic twists, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. What would you do if you were in Clara's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.